Hello and welcome to our Skype for Business training. My name is Brian Nice. I'm a solution architect here at Microsoft, and today we're going to be discussing conferencing. Now, there's a lot to go through when we talk about conferencing in and of itself, and we really want to divide this up into two major areas. First area we're going to talk about is around the roles in planning, scheduling, joining life cycle, a lot of the aspects that you would see from more of the end user side of the house. Then we're going to dig a little bit more into the back end side of things and look at how we handle high availability and disaster recovery. A little bit about the web side of the house, UCWA and ELWA, so the web applications that we have, and a little bit around the administration side of things. Then we're going to wrap up with a quick little discussion of the Cloud PSTN conferencing offering that we have available through our Office 365 platform. So let's dig right in and talk a little bit about the conference roles and the planning aspects that are associated with conferencing when we want to deploy this in the on-premises environment for Skype for Business. So first and foremost, we're going to get some terminology out of the way. When we talk about a conferencing server, specifically we're referring to what we call an MCU, or a multi-point control unit, specifically what an MCU stands for. This is the engine that drives multi-party conferencing. Right? And that conferencing could be various types of conferencing. For example, it could be an instant message conversation between three or more people. It could be an audio-video conversation. It could be data sharing. So content that I want to share, a PowerPoint that I want to display via my desktop share mechanism or something to that effect, or an individual app that I want to share out. All of these different types of modalities are available to us, but underneath all of that, anchoring all of those solutions is the MCU. Right? The MCU is the engine that's going to drive the ability for users to be able to collaborate through these different modalities themselves. Now, back in the day, right, in the Link 2013, even back into the Link 2010 days, we used to have an opportunity to split out these AV MCUs from the front-end pools themselves. We don't have that option anymore. When we look at Link 2013 and we look at Skype for Business Server, we're focused more on what we call the brick model, which basically means that each of the servers in the front-end pool are going to act the same. They're all going to have the same services installed on them. They're all going to function identically from a services perspective. So we no longer have this opportunity to split out the AV MCUs as we used to be able to do back in the 2010 days. Everything gets co-located with our front-end servers. This makes it a little bit more streamlined for us and also helps from the planning and the design aspects. So if we break these down, right, one of the first areas that we look at for an MCU is with instant messaging, right? In its simplest form, I want to have a conversation with more than one person. So not just myself and one of my colleagues, but maybe a 3 or 4 or a team of us want to get together and chat about something. That would utilize the IM conferencing MCU or the IM conferencing server. And that's all happening via SIP. SIP is our core protocol that we use between the clients and the servers. So all of this chat is happening through SIP, and it's all reaching a centralized MCU that's supporting the IM workload for us at that point. That one's pretty straightforward. When we get to the AV side of the house, you get the audio and video, that's where it gets a little more interesting, right? Because now we have a couple of different modalities that are being ingested by the MCUs. You have audio, which when we look at an audio MCU, that's responsible for doing what we call mixing. Right, so I may have multiple audio streams coming in, and it's the MCU's job to actually bring those audio streams, mix them together, and send them back out so that people that are in the conference can hear if there are multiple people talking or things of that nature. We'll actually be able to pick up on that. Right, so that's how we deal with audio. On the video side, that's more of a switched mechanism. Right, so the MCU itself is not actually transcoding or doing anything of that nature with regards to video. It's more operating on a switched mode process. So more specifically, when I look at video, I'm going to be focused on a particular codec. By default, we're going to use H.264 SVC, right? That's a scalable video codec that we work through. And what that allows us to do is be more aligned not only to standards from a video codec perspective, but it gives the client opportunities to vary their frame rate to these various downstream links. So if I happen to be on a very good quality connection, I can accept a video stream that gives me a much higher bit rate, a much higher resolution. Whereas other folks that are in the meeting, maybe they can't quite keep up with that resolution. So SVC will allow us to downscale that for these users to a slightly different frame rate or even a different resolution if their network links can't handle that. We do also still support what we call the RTV or the RT video codec. That's really there for backwards compatibility purposes, right? If I have an old Link 2010 client in my meeting, then I would worry about having RT video. But if I'm using 2013 or higher, generally speaking, RT video shouldn't come into play. We used to use a video codec called H.263. That has since been deprecated in the Link 2013, more specifically in the Skype for Business world. And part of the reasoning for that was H.263 was a very low frame rate, low quality codec. So rather than keep that around, it was something that was deemed, not the minimum bar as far as the quality that we're looking for. And we've replaced that with both RT video and H.264 SVC. Now, when we do send video in a conference, we have a feature that's implemented client side that's called the smart cropping feature for gallery view. Effectively, what this means is when I'm in a video conference, I can see up to 5 video streams all at once. The interesting thing is most of the video cameras today are 16:9, they're widescreen video cameras. But if you ever pay attention to the video output that you see in a Skype for Business meeting, it's actually cropped as a square. Well, it's not the MCU that's actually doing that. Your client is sending the video stream up as a 16:9 stream. It's being switched back down to the receiving clients, and when they receive that, they're actually going to crop it for gallery view. Now, this is important because it not only helps to understand the way the user experience works when we see gallery view as is, but it also explains when you get into a situation where perhaps a second person creeps into my video, you would actually see the video expand automatically for you from this little squared view to the 16:9 type view. And that's made possible by the fact that the client simply has to recognize that there's another person in the video stream and then just expand it out to the 16:9 format. So pretty nifty feature that we have available, something that the client will take care of for you. Now, as a sender, when I join a conference and I light up video, I am going to utilize a mechanism called simulcast, which basically means that I'm going to simulcast up my video streams that are optimized for all of the receivers that are in the meeting. So if I need to send an HD video stream up, I will. If I need to send a 15 frame per second stream up, I can. If I need to send an RT video stream up, I will. And I can simulcast all of that from my client. And then the AVMCU can switch the correct one to the destination client based on what they want, based on what they've requested, right? Oh, here comes a 2010 client. Well, Brian has simulcast all 3 of these streams up. Oh yeah, you're the 2010. You get the RT video stream. Oh, here's another Skype for Business client. And they're running this on a really high resolution monitor. Great. Maybe you can take the 720p 30 frame per second stream. Off you go. Right? So it's a really interesting way that we approach video. And it's not your traditional MCU in the sense that we're doing any kind of transcoding or any of that type of heavy lifting on the MCU itself when it comes to video. Now, application sharing is the ability for us to share out either our entire desktop or an individual application. Now, we have policies that can dictate whether you're even allowed to share anything or whether you're allowed to share your desktop or whether you're allowed to share just individual apps. All of that is available through the policies that we have inside of Skype for Business Server. The underlying engine that drives this is RDP, the Remote Desktop Protocol. We basically take RDP and we wrap it or we encapsulate it inside of the RTP stream, right? The real-time protocol stream that we use. So essentially, you're just layering this RDP feature inside of RTP to get it up to the application sharing MCU. Now, this does have a bit of a consequence to it in that when you're going through your planning exercises, you have to make sure that you take into consideration appropriate bandwidth requirements for app sharing, especially since it's not a very consistent usage of bandwidth. It's very bursty, as we would call it. So there may be instances where I'm sharing my desktop, but I'm not actually doing much of anything, right? So I'm not really consuming a lot of network bandwidth, but then maybe I maximize an application or I move something around on screen or what have you. Well, that generates more bandwidth because at that particular point, I've made a change and I have to send that up to the MCU itself for application sharing. So you just have to think that through when you're looking at your bandwidth and your quality considerations. And we do have ways that we can tweak and control that from within the Skype for Business administrative tools as well. Now, we do report on app sharing in our media quality reporting in our QoE database. So you can not only look at your audio and video, but you can also pull up application sharing information as well. Now, one of the most important things when we start talking about conferencing is getting a solid understanding of what we call the simple URLs. Right? Simple URLs are there for the purposes of allowing folks to actually join our meetings, but without having to have them understand what our underlying, SIP architecture looks like. So users are pretty savvy at being able to click URLs that look like the examples that you see here in this chart, HTTPS, meet.contoso.com, and so forth. They're less likely to pick on things that would look like an actual conference GRU that starts with SIP and whatnot. They may look at that and think, that's probably some kind of malware or something. I'm not going to click on that. So simple URLs actually provide us a mechanism for making this a little easier for the users to understand and simpler for them to click to join. Now, there's three categories of simple URLs we work with. The Meet URL, which is what we use to actually join a meeting. The dial-in URL, which we use to see what available dial-in numbers we have for dial-in conferencing. And then our admin URL that we would use internally if we wanted a simple way to access the administrative interface to Skype for Business. Now, as you look at each of these simple URL types, there's really three different approaches that you can take as to how you want to build your simple URLs. Now, the options are really going to be dependent on how many SIP domains you are choosing to support and what you want those URLs to look like. And consequently, how many certificate names you actually want to buy. So if, for example, we look at option one. Option one talks about having a dedicated Meet URL for each of the respective SIP domains that you're going to support. So for example, I'm supporting in this example 2 SIP domains, contoso.com and fabricam.com. In that instance, I could have meet.contoso and meet.fabricam. That'll work out quite well, except that I'm going to have to put both of those names on my SSL certificate that I use for web services. Now, with 2 SIP domains, probably not that big of a deal. With 200 SIP domains, that could get unwieldy very quickly, right? The other thing to realize with option one is although you can have multiple Meet URLs, there is only one dial-in URL that will be established for the entire deployment. So now you may run into a situation where you go, well, I have dialin.contoso.com, but then the people that are on Fabricam, they would have to go to a dialin.contoso.com URL, and that just might be weird, right? So maybe that's not going to quite work out for us, but a viable option and one of the simplest options. Option two is instead of having a dedicated URL for each, like meet.contoso and so on and so forth, we try to standardize on it. So for example, skype.contoso.com becomes the base URL, and then we use /meet to handle the meet URL aspect of it, /dialin to handle the dial-in aspect of it, and /admin, right? This helps to reduce the number of names that we work with, but it still doesn't necessarily solve the problem of now when I look at Fabricam, they're still also going to have skype.fabricam.com meet, but their dial-in and admin URLs are still going to be the same as we saw earlier. So this can kind of help to reduce some things, maybe help to streamline or optimize the way you've laid these URLs out. But if that option doesn't work for you, you can always look at option 3. Option 3 basically means that we would approach this as having a single base URL for all of these simple URLs, right? So in this instance, we use skype.contoso.com. Perhaps Contoso is the parent company, so off we go. That is going to be the base URL that we use for everything. So take a look at what that does to the Meet URLs. We get skype.contoso.com / the SIP domain, so contoso.com in this instance, /meet. And then if we add another SIP domain, right, skype.contoso.com / we put in their SIP domain, fabricam.com, and then /meet. And this would continue for all of the SIP domains that we want to support. Now, this is very advantageous if you're going to be supporting, hundreds of SIP domains, because now when I go to purchase my SSL certificate, I only have to buy one name. I buy skype.contoso.com. I don't have to buy hundreds of names for my SSL certificates like I would with either option 1 or 2. Of course, the downside for that is, the URLs get a little unwieldy at that point, and your users might look at those URLs and maybe not be terribly familiar with, what's actually going on here. In my mind, that's something you can easily solve through adoption. So, not too terribly worried about that. But option 3 really does make sense when you get into environments that have many, many SIP domains to support. So how do these simple URLs get used in practice? I mean, let's say that we've gone ahead and standardized on one of those options that we just talked about. Well, what does that actually do for us? Well, let's take an example straight through here. So here's an example of a simple URL. join.microsoft.com/meet/another user and then / a particular meeting ID that we see here. So what's actually going on here? Well, if we kind of dissect this a little bit, first and foremost, you can tell from this simple URL, the way that it's constructed, that the SIP domain is Microsoft.com. Simple enough. Next thing that I can see is that the organizer's name in this case is another, right? That's the URI, the SIP URI of the user, the left-hand side of the URI. Also commonly referred to as their alias, right? So this is the user's alias as they're defined inside of Skype for Business. And then I can also tell what their conference ID is from this simple URL. So if I put all of that together, I'm able to now figure out, oh, well, the organizer of this meeting must be another at Microsoft.com because I know what the organizer's name is. I know what his SIP domain is. I'm able to extract all of this information. Now, what do I do with it? Well, really cool thing is all of that becomes what we call the SIP URI of the actual conference itself. Now, you take a look at that last piece of data that we have here, starting with SIP and then going all the way across to where we see this opaque. We have the app conference focus. We'll get into what that is in just a second. But the meeting ID, this is the actual address from a SIP perspective of the conference. It's not a really friendly thing to look at, right? And most users, if you presented them with that and said, hey, click on this to join my meeting, they'd probably think twice about clicking on that, right? But telling a user, hey, click on this link to join the meeting, and then you know what? Behind the scenes, we'll turn this into this for you. Well, that makes life a whole lot easier. In fact, it makes it a whole lot simpler. See what I did there? That's good. So if we want to now look at joining our conference, we have to think about what the conference ID situation is going to be. Now, when I look at my conference IDs, as we saw in the join URL, the conference ID is an alphanumeric ID. And that makes perfect sense when you're joining from, your PC or some type of, computer-based system, because you can simply click the link and off we go. That doesn't work out so well for people that are trying to dial in from a traditional cell phone, right? Not a smartphone, but just an old legacy flip phone and trying to dial in the old-fashioned way. So that's going to be a numeric ID that we look at. Well, we'll get to that in just a second. As I still finish up talking about this alphanumeric ID, there's two ways that we approach alphanumeric IDs. There is what we call the default, right? Or what we call our public or reservation list meeting. Basically, what that means is out of the box, when you create a meeting, that meeting is always going to have the exact same meeting ID all the time, no matter what. Now, that's simple, right? It's what we call reservation list because you can join this meeting anytime you want. It's not your meeting starts at 9. Sorry, it's 8:45. It's too early to join your meeting. No, we are a reservation list platform, so you can join this meeting at any time. And the fact that it's the same meeting ID makes it really easy for folks to join your meeting. The downside of that, of course, is it also makes it really easy for unwanted people to join your meeting, right? And in the example of maybe I have a meeting going from 8 to 9, and I have another meeting backed up to that from 9 to 10. Well, if they're both using the same meeting ID, what tends to happen? Well, your 8 o'clock meeting runs long, your 9 o'clock meeting, people show up early, and suddenly you have people in the calls mixed in that maybe you didn't want, right? Could be very bad if you have, competitors that you're trying to talk to in two different calls. That's why we also give you an option to modify this by invite or even by policy to ensure that every time you create a new meeting ID or a new meeting inside of the Outlook plugin, we generate a new meeting ID for you each and every time. Now, as I mentioned, that only works out well when you're joining from a computer-based system. If I've got my old flip phone that I'm trying to dial in from, I'm not going to be typing in alphanumeric IDs. That doesn't work out so well. So when you create a meeting ID, we're also going to generate a numeric ID so that we have a way to map your conference ID, which is that alphanumeric ID, to the dial-in numeric ID, to the SIP URI of the actual meeting itself. That's all the job of what we call the conference directory. Right? So when you go and build your front-end pools, for each front-end pool, there are going to be a series of conference directories created on these front-end pools. And the job of the conference directory is to maintain the mapping of numeric IDs to conference IDs to SIP URI. So that we know when somebody dials in from a flip phone and they type in a numeric ID, they actually get into the correct meeting. Right? And there's an algorithm that runs on the front-end pools that ensures that these directory IDs that are generated give us a unique numeric ID so that we don't run into a situation where they dial into a meeting, type in a number, and accidentally end up in somebody else's all-hands call. That might not be a good thing. Right? So when you build your front-end pools, you have an opportunity to create a certain number of conference directories. And there's going to be one there by default. And you might wonder, should I create more than one? Well, our general guidance is to create one conference directory for every approximately 999 users, every 1,000 users on the pool. Why do we recommend this? Well, because that helps keep the IDs to a shorter length, right? If I didn't create multiple conference directories and I had 1,000 users all trying to use one directory, the numeric IDs tend to get quite long at that point, as do the alphanumeric IDs, because now we're trying to make sure that they maintain their uniqueness, which means that we need more digits to accommodate that. So generally speaking, at the beginning of your deployment, when you get this front-end pool deployed, that's when you should be thinking about, maybe I should create some more conference directories so that as I add more users to my front-end pool, the conference IDs don't get really long right out of the gate. Now, obviously, over time, they're going to have to increase in size. So a lot of times folks will ask me, well, can I make sure that they are only 5 digits? Well, no, you can't. You can make sure that they stay as short as possible, but you can't get it down to saying, I only want my conference IDs to be 5 digits. My numeric IDs to only be 5 digits. No. Or I want them to be these 5 digits. No, you don't have an opportunity to do that. Now, the screenshot that you see here kind of takes you through the conference planning flow. And we're not going to dig into this in every gory detail because this is actually a pretty nice flow chart that you can follow through and look through as a reference. But really what we're talking about here when we do planning and what we want to emphasize here is you need to make sure that you understand what facets of conferencing you're going to be using. So are we doing web conferencing? Are we doing audio and video conferencing? Are we going to allow folks to dial in from the PSTN using our traditional handsets, things of that nature? Are we going to let external users come into the environment? So folks that are outside of our organization, whether they're members of our company that happen to be working remotely, or whether they're folks from another company or even anonymous users, right? Are we going to allow these folks into the meeting? Because if so, we have specific requirements we need to meet that scenario. Do we need resiliency? How are we going to handle resiliency, right? Is HADR, high availability and disaster recovery, important to us? If so, well, then we're going to need to follow the prescriptive guidance that we see here for HA and for DR. And then, of course, what are we going to do with our simple URLs? What options are we going to do for dial-in, for meet, and optionally for the admin URL? A couple of other areas to consider as well has to deal with compliance, right? What do I need to know with regards to compliance? Am I required to archive certain users, all users, no users, right? Where do we fit in the compliance realm when it comes to conferencing? And then finally, how do we handle the multiple geography standpoint, right? Are we going to have multiple pools deployed, perhaps in each world region, maybe in North America, maybe in EMEA, maybe in APAC? Or are we going to run everything out of one centralized data center and make sure that we understand the implications there, right? So how do you plan to handle the multi-geo aspects, right? So these are all areas that we need to think through from a design and from a planning standpoint, because that's going to help to drive the requirements that are needed and the components that are needed to implement the solution itself. So now that we've talked a little bit about some of the architecture and planning items, let's talk about the conference scheduling aspect and see what that looks like. So when I'm looking at conference scheduling from the client side perspective, really what we're looking at here in our screenshot is options that we can configure on the meeting at the time we create the meeting invite inside of our Outlook client. Now, this could also be done after the fact too, but this is typically something you'll want to be playing around with at the time you create the meeting. Now, when you go to create your conference, there's a couple of different conference types that you can create. You can do a simple ad hoc, which is just simply going into your Skype for Business client and firing up Meet Now, as we call it. Alternatively, you can do what we call a scheduled conference, which is going into your Outlook client, going in, finding a meeting invite, meeting time, meeting slot that you want, and then making that a Skype meeting by simply tapping the Skype meeting icon inside of your taskbar. That can create a scheduled conference for you. Now, here's the interesting part. Take a look here when I start talking about conference security, right? What I'm looking at here under conference security actually ties very nicely to the Skype meeting options that you see here on the right-hand side. Basically, when you first create a Skype for Business meeting, right, the options of whether I want it to be my public-facing meeting or whether I want it to be a private meeting are actually controlled by the radio buttons that you see here, right? So my dedicated meeting space would be the default. That's the same conference ID that you would use, by default out of the box. Whereas a new meeting space lets you have a unique meeting ID for this particular meeting, ensuring that, there's no overlap between, say, a previous call and your current call. So that's our first level of security, if you will, that we have. But more importantly, the conference security options that you see here align with the drop-down options that we see under who gets to wait in the lobby. Now, if you take a look at this option, we basically have a few items available to us. By default, you have anyone, right? So who needs to wait in the lobby? Well, don't have to wait in the lobby? Nobody. So whoever can get into your meeting, they can come in and away they go. We'll talk more about the specifics of the instantiation of the conference in a little bit, but for right now, this option is the simplest and there are essentially no restrictions. You can scale that back to what we call anyone from my organization. So basically anybody that is a member of your internal Skype for Business deployment would be allowed to get into this meeting without you as the meeting organizer, if you will, having to open the meeting or unlock the meeting, right? Then you have what we call people I invite from my company. People I invite from my company is what we call closed authentication. What that means is I create a meeting invite and I send it out to 5 folks inside of Outlook. And for whatever reason, a couple of those folks decide to forward my invite on to 20 or 30 other people. Well, guess what? Those 20 or 30 other people, even though they have all of my meeting information, they're going to end up in the lobby because they were not people that I, as the meeting organizer, invited. Sure, they got the invite passed on to them, and yeah, they know how to dial in or they know how to get into the system, but guess what? I didn't invite you. You're not going to get in. That's what we call closed authenticated. The last option here is this only me, the meeting organizer. That's effectively what we call a locked meeting, right? Nobody gets into this meeting except me. Now, that's great from a security perspective, but that's not so good if for whatever reason I can't get to the meeting to open it. Well, if it's locked, I am the only one that can get in there, and that's not really all that good. Right, so the 4 options that you see here for conference security actually align very nicely to the 4 options that you see in this drop-down box. Now, interestingly enough, you can change the security mode at any time you want, even while the conference is running, right? So maybe you get the conference going and you're like, wow, you know what? This is it. I've got 15 people in here. I don't want any more. I can go back into this particular meeting option and change it to be a locked conference. Boom. Everybody that's already in the meeting stays in. Nobody else gets in. All right, so it's a neat approach that you can take to how you manage the conference itself and the meeting itself, even on an ongoing basis. Now, as we start to look at the conferencing aspects, we want to make sure that we understand what the various roles and responsibilities are when we look inside of conferencing. So most folks are familiar with the concept of a meeting presenter, right? Someone that actually has the ability to present content or to speak with audio or present video or things of that nature, right? That's kind of that role of the presenter. They are the guys that control the meeting. They are the folks that are typically designated by the organizer, although they could be promoted, right, to be a presenter as the meeting occurs. But generally speaking, once we get the meeting invite sent out, we usually know who the presenters are going to be in the meeting itself. Now, you do have an organizer, and that's implicitly the person that scheduled the meeting, right? We don't actually have an organizer role that you're going to see per se in the unit in the UI, but the person that schedules the meeting, they are by default the organizer, and they are also by default the presenter, right? If the organizer's user account gets deleted out of Active Directory, all of their conferences go away as well. They get deleted out of the RTC databases in Skype for Business. So just be wary if you delete a user account, if they had any standing conferences that other folks were expecting to join, those meetings will no longer be valid. And then, of course, you have an attendee, right? And that's basically everybody else. If you're not a presenter, you're an attendee. They can't add any content to the meeting, so they can't share an app or share their desktop or upload a PowerPoint or upload any kind of files. They can only download content from the meeting if we give them permission. By default, the permission is for presenters and other presenters to be able to download content. I, of course, can change that and allow attendees, but by default, they can't download anything unless I give them permission. And I can promote or demote folks from these various roles. So I can make an attendee a presenter, or I can demote a presenter back to attendee. You have the ability to do this on the fly during the meeting. You also have the ability to do this ahead of time when you establish the meeting invite, with one exception. And that is when you're creating a presenter or you're assigning presenter roles, you can only do that for folks that are inside your company, right? We mentioned it right here. You can't designate a federated user in advance to actually be a presenter. And that's more of a security reason. And we'll talk about that when we look at how the conference lifecycle works later in this particular presentation. Now, when you're dealing with scheduling meetings, all of the scheduling of meetings will typically happen through the Outlook plugin. Now, this is, of course, not the only place you can do it, because we do actually have the ability to do it through a web interface. But the most common approach for us to take is to use the Outlook conference add-in. Now, the conferencing information, right, the conference itself is stored inside of Skype for Business. However, all of the meeting-specific information, what time, what day, the duration, all of that, that's actually not stored in Skype for Business. That is stored in Exchange. So if I were to look at the flow of this from my Outlook client, the Outlook conferencing add-in is actually going to send a service request to a component that we have in Skype for Business called the Focus Factory. Focus Factory's job, much like any other factory, right? The factory's job is to create things. Well, the Focus Factory's job is to create a focus. Well, a focus is basically a conference, an instantiation of a conference for us. So the Outlook client is going to talk via a service message to this Focus Factory, basically saying, hey, Brian wants to create a meeting, and it's for Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific. Great. Well, we're going to write that information into the Skype for Business backend, and we're going to allow, based on the policy settings that have been assigned to the user, we're going to allow them to configure the meeting, as required. So, for example, I want to create this meeting, and if I have a policy that says you're not allowed to do desktop share, well, then we're going to ensure that no desktop share is allowed in this particular conference. So we do a policy check to make sure that we align what the user is creating with what they're actually authorized to do. We'll then write that information back into the backend database. Actually, we'll synchronously write it between the front end and the backend database, but it'll end up in the RTC database on the backend SQL instance. So now that conference is registered and ready to go. Now, we get a response back as an OK to the conference add-in, so it knows that the request that it made to the Focus Factory succeeded. Now, at the same time, we can do a save of that meeting invite, or we can send it out to all the invitees from the Outlook client itself, and that will then get registered inside of my Exchange mailbox. And that's what's now going to show up on my calendar, as well as show up on everybody else's calendar that I invited. Okay, so interesting that we make sure that to understand that there's two different places that this conference data goes. Some of it is in Skype for Business, and then some of it is also within your Exchange mailbox itself. Now, if I want to do some customization of the invite itself, I have some limited options available to me, right? And what we mean by this is when you go in your Outlook client and you create this Skype meeting invite, we're going to provide a little bit of a template for you inside of the body of the message. Well, you can customize that to a degree in the sense, like you see here, I can add some logo URLs to it. I can put a custom footer, some custom text at the bottom. So there are some basic things that we can do. It's not extensive. It's not like a whole rebrand type thing. But there are a few things that I can do to customize what the meeting invite would look like. And you can either do this through Control Panel, as you see on the left-hand side here, or you can do it through PowerShell if you like, going through the Skype for Business management shell. Now, as we talk about hybrid, we did a whole module where we talked about the understanding of how hybrid itself is going to work. One thing we have to be very cognizant of is the fact that when we do cross-premises moves, that is, take a user from the on-premises world and put them in the cloud, or take them from the cloud and bring them back to on-premises, conference information does not get migrated automatically. As a result, the users need to go and download the Skype meeting update tool. Now, the screenshot you see here is a little dated. It shows the link meeting update tool, but the same process applies for the branding of Skype meeting update tool. The job of this tool is to go and comb your Outlook calendar, your Exchange calendar, looking for Skype meetings and update all of those meetings with the new information that's required for the new environment that you've been placed into, and then send out updated meeting invitations to all of the corresponding invitees or attendees to your meeting. So need to make sure that we understand that this tool has to be run client side by the end user if they've been moved from a cross premises type deployment. All right, so now we have the conference scheduled. Great, we've got invites going out. Fantastic. Now it's time to join the conference. Well, what does that look like when I want to join the conference? This is all built around a feature that we call the Join Launcher. Right, the Join Launcher actually runs on the server side, and it is responsible for doing a couple of things. First off, it's responsible for detecting what type of client the user is going to be joining with. So for example, if I, from my desktop here today or from my Surface here today, were to click on a join link, the Join Launcher would detect that I have the Skype for Business full client installed, and it would launch that client and attempt to join me into that meeting using my full Skype for Business client. If I happen to do it from a machine that doesn't have Skype for Business installed, it would automatically default to using what we call the web application. So it would launch a web-based application for me. I would be given an option to install a plugin if I wanted to do audio and video. And then I'd be able to join the meeting without actually having a Skype for Business client installed. The other thing that it's responsible for doing is what we call cracking the join URL, which basically is that process of taking the HTTPS join request that we saw and turning it into the SIP URI that we would use to get into the meeting itself. Now, this Join Launcher does support launching from my desktop clients, my mobile clients, phone clients, Android, iOS, Windows 8, Windows 10, right? We've built a lot of intelligence into this Join Launcher to be able to adapt to the new operating systems and new platforms that are out there. So we'll have opportunities for us to be able to join these meetings no matter what type of client we're joining from. Now, meeting joins is a very important concept for us, and we take it very seriously. So we want to make sure that we provide some improvements to the meeting join experience, specifically some quality improvements. Well, one of the first areas that we get into is this concept of expired meetings. Happens a lot. Folks will go into Skype for Business, they'll create a meeting, and then when they go to create another meeting, rather than following that same process, they just go back to one of their old meetings and they copy and paste the meeting info into a new invite and send it out. Well, that's only going to work as long as the meeting hasn't expired. And because we didn't actually use the Skype meeting button, to have the Outlook plugin generate the meeting for us, nothing got written to the backend database, nothing got updated in the backend database. It means it's quite possible that meeting actually has expired. Well, the user doesn't know, they send the meeting invite out, and oh dear, somebody tries to join the meeting, this meeting's not valid. Well, that's not good. We identify that as a major cause of meeting join failures. I mean, even here inside of Microsoft, right? So we want to make sure that we can automatically address this and fix some of these problematic meetings. Now, the Outlook add-in does automatically fix some of these problematic meetings, but in later iterations of the Outlook plugin, specifically into the Outlook 2016 world, we've actually removed some of that code from the Outlook plugin. So you're really down to an adoption and training issue at this point, and we want to make sure that folks understand they should be using the Outlook add-in itself to create and manage these meetings and not get in the habit of copying and pasting invite information from a previous meeting, right? External participant join has been a huge pain point for us, right? So we want to get client telemetry so that we know what's exactly happening with these meeting joins. And most often we see the problem is meeting joins from folks that are trying to use a full client, but don't actually have federation established, right? So we're trying to get some additional client telemetry so that we can make sure that we get all of the information into the system and understand why these meeting join scenarios may or may not be working. And of course, finally, we want to have some better handling of these failover scenarios, right? How do I ensure that I can still join my meetings in the event that I fail over from one pool to the next? And how about giving the users and even the admins some more informative error messages when a meeting join is impacted, rather than giving some generic message that just makes it look like the user did something wrong. So let's look at visually what the join launcher process looks like, kind of take you through a few steps that we have here. So at the very top, I have my web browser, right? And the browser's there because when I get a meeting invite and I get a join link and I click that inside of Outlook, it's an HTTPS URL. So that's going to fire up my browser and off we go. So in this case, I'm going to go to my join link. My example here is join.microsoft.com. Well, obviously the first thing I need to do is resolve that in DNS. Make sure that that resolves back to a particular IP. Hopefully I'll get a good response back. Now, this is going to respond back with either the IP address of the pool, a VIP on a hardware load balancer if we're doing an enterprise edition pool. It could be on a director. It could be on a reverse proxy if it's external, right? Point being is it's going to resolve to a web services URL that's going to be posted either internally by directors or front-end pools or externally by reverse proxies. Once I establish that, now I can make my GET request up to that particular system, right, that I'm trying to join to, the join.microsoft.com system, and say, hey, I'm actually trying to join this particular meeting. This will also include a client tag in the header so I know what type of browser this user is using, where they're coming from, and now the join launcher can go and do his business, right? He can actually crack the URL and figure out what the meeting GRU is, right, or the actual SIP address of the meeting is, and send back an HTTP response with that appropriate SIP URI. And again, if it's a full desktop client, they'll be able to join straight with that SIP URI. If it's not a full desktop client, we can return back the web join URL for them to use to get into the web services. So here, this example shows step 5 being a native client. So they can just take that SIP URI that the join launcher was able to determine for us and use that to join the focus or the meeting itself straight against the conference. If I happen to be coming from a device that doesn't have a full client installed, then no worries, I can use the web join URL. And that web join URL is also known as the reach client. That'll typically come back as the external web services URL of the pool that's hosting the meeting. And then I can use the client's web browser or what have you to be able to join the conference through the Link web app or through UCWA, for example, if I happen to be using a mobile client. And we'll talk more about that coming up in just a little bit. Now, when I look at the conference join aspect and I stick some firewalls in between, there's a few other things that we need to make sure that we understand from a flow perspective, right? So here we're looking at, in this example, on the left-hand side, we have all of the folks that are outside of the organization, my web browsers, my full Skype for Business or Link clients, got my perimeter with edge and reverse proxies. And over on the right, I have my front-end pools, SQL, maybe some web browsers, and maybe an internal client. So again, in this scenario, same idea. I have some DNS entries that I need to be aware of. So in this example, I'm joining meet.contoso.com as my join URL. I need to query for DNS. Well, if it's an internal user, they're going to query that record and be directed to this front-end pool that you see here. There's going to be some certificate entries for this guy that's going to include, as you see here, meet.contoso.com as part of the name, right? Because it's an SSL connection. I've got to have that name on the cert or this isn't going to work. At that point, by looking at the Meet URL, I can tell, oh, meet.contoso.com, the SIP URI, the SIP domain is contoso.com. Fantastic. I can construct the GRU as appropriate and boom, we're ready to join the meeting. Contrast that with somebody that's outside the network. Same process. I'm going to meet.contoso.com. But of course, in this case, it resolves to a public IP. Well, that public IP is going to land here on my reverse proxy, right? And the reverse proxy is going to create an SSL bridge from the user's browser to the reverse proxy, and then from the reverse proxy into the web services on the corresponding front-end pool. Now, as before, there needs to be an SSL certificate bound to that reverse proxy that's listening for the name meet.contoso.com. Same reason, it's an SSL connection, right? If the name's not there, the name doesn't match, I'm not going to be able to establish that secured session. As the fact that this is a bridge, right? The reverse proxy itself is going to be publishing the external web services of that front-end pool. And we call it a bridge because the clients connect to the reverse proxy on 443. The reverse proxy connects to the next hop or the front-end pool on 4443. So we actually bridge those two ports together so that the request can come safely from the client to a known 443 port, but then we can direct it to the external web services site on the front end pool, which is actually listening on 4443. Now, it wouldn't be a conferencing discussion if we didn't get a chance to throw a ladder diagram in there. So we're going to take a chance to step through what this looks like in ladder diagram form when I look at the conference join process. So the players that we have involved here are the conferencing client, the focus, which is the actual meeting itself, and then in this case, say the web conferencing server. Now let's take a look at this example and see what's slightly different about this from the other aspects that we talked about. So here I have my conferencing client, and he wants to actually join the meeting. Well, under the hood, what we're using is a protocol called C3P. Technically speaking, it is CCCP, but we call it C3P. That's the protocol that we use for conferencing, and we wrap that inside of SIP. Now, there are some actions that we can initiate through C3P, and one of those actions or commands that we can do is what's called add user. So if I look at this first option, in my SIP invite, I am issuing the C3P command, add user to focus. That's a really long, drawn-out way of saying, I'm going to join this meeting. That's effectively what we're doing here. I get a response back from the focus saying, okay, got it. You want to join this meeting? Fantastic. Well, let's figure out, first and foremost, that I'm going to join this meeting. Let's do a subscription. That's what this SIP info is. Let's do a subscription to conferencing state and see if I can get the roster, right? See if I'm actually allowed in the meeting to see the roster. Well, in this particular instance, the focus actually responds back with an on hold message to me, right? It's actually still a SIP 200 OK, but in C3P, I'm getting a command back that says on hold. What do you think that means? Well, if I'm on hold, basically means I didn't get in. I'm not in the meeting yet. Well, where would I be if I'm not in the meeting, but I'm trying to join it? I'd be in the lobby, right? So this is an example that shows, hey, I tried to join the meeting, but for whatever reason, because of how the meeting is constructed, maybe I'm not the organizer. Maybe it's a locked meeting. Maybe it's people I invited and I wasn't invited. One of those scenarios came true, and the focus, who is the traffic cop, right, for who gets into the meeting, said, oh, no, thanks for trying, Brian, but you're on hold. You need to sit in the lobby. And now I need to wait for a presenter to actually admit me from the lobby. Well, maybe I go through and I talk to a few folks and I go, dude, I really need to be in this meeting. Okay, fine. So they see me in the lobby and they go, oh, yeah, there's Brian. We'll just admit him, right? That's actually, from a presenter standpoint, issuing a SIP info command called set user access granted. Basically means, okay, you know what, Brian, you hung out in the lobby long enough. It's time for you to come in to the meeting. We will go ahead and allow you to come in. Yay, I'm happy. I get a notify back from the focus, including the conferencing state, conferencing server URI. Now I'm actually admitted into the meeting. Now I can see the roster and I can start to take advantage of all of the modalities that are going to be happening in this particular meeting. So this involves, in this case, maybe I've joined the meeting and somebody is actually sharing out a whiteboard, for example. And I go, ooh, I want in on that. I want to see what's going on inside of this whiteboard that you're sharing out. Oh, fantastic. I'm going to send an invite, C3P add user to web conferencing server, right? Dude, I want in. I want to see what you're presenting. Well, I'll send the request to the focus because he is the traffic cop, right? And the focus will go, oh, okay, you want to get into the web conferencing session. No problem. I'll go ahead and make that request on your behalf. And he'll issue a C3P add user command to the web conferencing server itself, the actual MCU, and say, okay, Brian wants to join this particular MCU. This MCU will respond back, in this case with a C3P OK and a PSOM connection, because web conferencing uses PSOM, uses the persistent shared object model. That gets passed back to the focus, which in turn the focus passes back to me saying, all right, you're allowed to get in, and here's all the relevant information that you need to go to get to the web conferencing server, right? This is the PSOM connection info. Here's your auth token that you need to get in. And now you'll be able to see whatever content is being presented by the web conferencing server once you establish your PSOM connection. All right, so this is a good walkthrough that kind of shows a couple of different aspects of conference join, including getting into the lobby and even being able to enlist yourself into one of the MCUs that we have available. Now, speaking of the lobby, we put a quick chart here together for you to give you a little bit of an understanding of what the purpose of the lobby is and why we even need it. Right? So if you look at the tables here, The way that these meetings are structured, right? You have different meeting types that you can create, and you have different classifications of users that you can add, right? You have folks that you can add from your company. You have folks that are federated. You have folks that are anonymous. You have folks that are anonymous but dialing in via a PSTN or a dial-in conferencing number. Or you have folks from your company that dial in and then actually authenticate themselves via the PSTN. Right? We've got all these different types of scenarios available to us, but we want to understand where people are going to end up based on the type of meeting that I create. So when I look at my meeting types here, right, I have 4 different meeting types: my everyone, my company, my invited only, and my locked. These correspond to the drop downs that we saw earlier when we were looking in the plugin for the Outlook conference add-in. And what we want to understand is, based on the meeting type that you see on the left and the classification of individual that you want to invite, such as a company person, federated, anonymous with PSTN, or company with PSTN, there's going to be different scenarios where they actually get into the meeting automatically versus end up in the lobby. So for example, with our first scenario, this is the everyone meeting type. So this is, I'm in my client. Who gets to wait in the lobby? Nobody. Nobody has to wait. Everybody gets in. And as you see, boom, all the way across the board, everybody is in. One little exception, right? The anonymous by a PSTN in, but as long as there's one company user in there. Right? This is a mechanism to ensure that we don't have some anonymous person that just dials into the meeting and voila, they're in there all by themselves and trying to, do something that they shouldn't be doing inside of our system. So there's got to be at least one company user in for an anonymous PSTN user to get into the mix. Whereas contrast that with, say, the invited only meeting type, right? If I invited the person from the company, boom, they're in. If I, as the organizer, didn't invite them, they end up in the lobby. Doesn't matter that they got the information or not, they end up in the lobby, much like everybody else does, right? They end up in the lobby with the exception of anybody that might be invited. Right, so this is a great way to kind of look at how we handle access control in the lobby itself. Now, of course, we can tweak these as necessary, right? So I can create what we call PSTN lobby bypass, which means that for the anonymous folks over PSTN, I can say, well, for companies, for invited only, I can make it such that even when you come in via the PSTN, you can bypass the lobby, right? That means that, of course, we still need to have an authenticated user in there, right? But now anybody that dials in, they don't get stuck in the lobby, and I don't have to, worry about admitting them from that point. This is more of a convenient feature because if you think about it, sometimes you'll look in the lobby and you'll go, okay, who is that on the 949 area code? I don't know. Who am I looking at, right? So you might get to a point where if the meeting is not that sensitive, you might just say, look, if you're going to dial into the meeting, come on in, right? It's not sensitive info, so just come on in, and that way I don't have to ask who every single person is that's out in the lobby. Now, obviously, clearly, if it's a sensitive type meeting, then you're not going to go down this route, but hey, we've got some options for how we want to configure this. Okay, so now we talked a little bit about how to create the meetings, how to join the meetings. Let's talk a little bit about the life cycle of the meetings, right? How do we make sure that we understand the overall life cycle of the meeting itself? So the line chart that we have here is going to kind of take us through an overall life cycle that we would see with conferencing themselves, from kind of creation, the time that we set up the meeting, all the way till the time the meeting expires. So take a look here. We start on the left-hand side. We get this meeting created and saved in the database, and this meeting gets an expiration time. That typical expiration time is 15 days after the end of the meeting. Now, if it's a recurring meeting, right, and there's a recurring meeting with no end date, well, then there's no expiration date because it just recurs forever. But if it's a meeting that you've only set, say, for Friday from 8 to 9 in the morning, then we'll have an expiry time that's 15 days past the end date of that particular meeting. Now, that meeting is now saved and available, and you can join it at any time. Like we said earlier, this is reservationless. So even though the meeting might be set for 9 o'clock in the morning on Friday, I could go at 8 o'clock in the morning on Thursday and join the meeting and maybe pre-upload some content and get it all staged and ready to go. That's totally fine, right? Any participant that joins that meeting activates the meeting, right? It's called instantiation of the focus. Right? Basically means that, all right, somebody now wants to join the meeting. The focus has to spin up all of the resources that are necessary so that we can get the conference ready to roll. Now we've got folks in the meeting. We're doing our thing. We're having a good old time. And now everybody leaves. Or the presenter decides, you know what, the meeting is all done. Thank you for your time. And they go into the Skype client and they choose end meeting. And that basically boots everybody out, right? That's this presenter terminates option. Shortly after that, the meeting is going to be deactivated. And by deactivation, we mean any attendees that remain are ejected. That sounds just so cool. I wish I could visually see that happening, but usually doesn't, right? But all of our attendees get ejected out of the meeting. We clean up any state from the focus perspective. And then we issue what's called the delete conference command, which basically removes the instantiation of that focus itself. Now, that's just a deactivation of the meeting, right? The meeting is not expired yet, because remember, there's a 15-day gap there. That means that anytime after that, within this 15-day window, I could go back and click that link again, and boom, I'm back into the meeting. That will reactivate the meeting for me. So just because the meeting is deactivated doesn't mean that it can't be reactivated. All the way up until we get to the expiration time. Boom. Once we hit the expiration time, or the expiration time has passed, or we've gone past the grace period that's set for the server, now it's time to go and actually expire this meeting. And now we're going to purge it from the database. We're going to block this meeting at this point, which basically means that 15 days have passed. It's now been 3 weeks. And I'm like, let me go click on that link again. Boom. Well, guess what? That meeting invite doesn't work anymore, because now we've gone ahead and finished out deleting the meeting existence, gotten rid of any content that's out on the file share. For all intents and purposes, this meeting is gone. This life cycle that you see here, this is why we want to make sure that we don't get users in the habit of just copying and pasting Skype meeting info into meeting invites, because we don't want them to run the risk of this scenario happening. We've expired the meeting on the back end, but as far as users concerned, they think it's all just working. Yeah, that could be bad. Now, one last thing about the life cycle, though. This applies to these new meetings that you create, but remember there were two different types of meetings, right? I had my public meeting, right? That's the meeting that's assigned to my user account. And then I have private meetings where I can generate unique URIs or unique meeting IDs for each of them. Your public meeting never expires. So that's another reason why it's kind of handy in some instances if you just default to using the public meeting. You're not worried about, people piling over themselves if you have overlapping calls. You don't really have to worry about the meeting ever expiring, because the public meeting itself doesn't expire. That would only change if an administrator forced a change on that, or if you were to remove the account and recreate it. So this slide is meant to talk to you about the pieces of the puzzle that are involved from the conferencing standpoint and how they tie into the whole conferencing lifecycle. So there's really three main areas that we look at inside of conferencing: the focus factory, and the conferencing server factory. The focus is the traffic cop. He is the one that's responsible for making sure that the right people get into the meeting, that the wrong people stay out of the meeting, and that the right policies are enforced, right? Oh, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to do desktop share in this meeting. Let's make sure that that modality gets disabled. No, you can't do video. Yes, we can do audio. Yes, we can do video. Yes, we can do all these various. The focus is going to take care of all those particular aspects. The focus factory, as we saw earlier, his job is to create focus, create foci, right? Create focus, right? That's his job. So the conferencing add-in talks to the focus factory, which in turn will create the focus or the instance of the focus if it happens to be a scheduled meeting, right? And then we have our conferencing server factory, and his job is to really, as it would sound, create conferencing servers, right? Create MCUs to help us understand, in conjunction with Windows Fabric, where are the MCUs that we should be using, what's their load, and which one should I pick next? When somebody decides, hey, they want to join an application share MCU, if I have a pool of 12 servers, which one do I pick? Well, go talk to the conferencing server factory and talk to Windows Fabric, and we'll tell you which particular conferencing server you need to talk to. Nice part about it is the focus is going to coordinate all of that for you, right? You as a client, you're only ever going to talk directly to the focus factory when you're scheduling the meeting, or to the focus itself when you're joining or interacting with the meeting. Now, a meeting's done when, of course, everybody leaves, or the presenter terminates it, or when 10 minutes have elapsed since the last authenticated person has left the conference. Right? We don't want to leave the conference hanging out there and just let some anonymous user sit on there and just, soak up what's going on in the conference room, or have a free conference with themselves and a couple other folks. Once all of the authenticated folks leave the meeting, they've got about a 10-minute window to get out. And if they don't, we'll kick them out. When the conference gets deactivated after that 10-minute window, any remaining participants are going to get ejected. And now that's where all of our media streaming is going to stop. And effectively, we're going to start this tear down process so that we can get all of the resources reallocated as necessary. Now, as mentioned earlier, just because it's deactivated doesn't mean it's dead. It can be reactivated at any given time, provided we haven't passed the expiration period. So this slide is meant to kind of reinforce that whole activation and deactivation piece. Right? So understanding what activation of a conference means, that is instantiating it. Deactivation is tearing it down. And the focus is the traffic cop that handles all of this stuff. Takes care of instantiating itself, people joining, people leaving, and the actual deactivation process itself. And this is just a quick ladder diagram that shows you what that process looks like from an activation and deactivation standpoint, right? Our client, via the service message, talks to the focus factory, which creates the new conference. It gets written to the backend database. We're successful. We get a response back to the client, and off we go. Now, when I look at this particular aspect of talking to the focus factory, I know that this client here is the Outlook plugin because I'm scheduling a meeting, right? My client, my Skype client itself isn't going to talk to the focus factory directly in most cases because it's not actually scheduling a meeting. The Skype client itself is generally going to talk to the focus because that's when I want to instantiate something or I want to join a particular meeting. This slide kind of sums up that whole concept of the activation of the conference and what's actually going on under the hood when you're talking to the focus and all of the various aspects that it needs to do. The first user that joins the conference is the one that activates the conference. That doesn't have to be the meeting organizer. That could be any one of the presenters. It could even be an anonymous user for that matter, right? They can activate the conference. Now, they may activate it and be stuck in the lobby, but they've still activated the conference at that point, right? So the first user joining the conference could be anybody, enterprise user, federated user, anonymous user. Once the conference is activated, now we can have, meeting invites or the meeting presenters or the meeting organizer themselves also join. And then if someone happens to be stuck in the lobby, they can go ahead and admit them as necessary. So lots of fun stuff that happens during this activation, but the job of the focus is to really handle all of this for you so it becomes really straightforward from an end user's perspective. So we get a chance to run through our meeting. Now we're done. Time to deactivate, right? So this slide just kind of takes you through some of the bullets of what it looks like when we deactivate one of these conferences. And as mentioned before, right, the deactivation could be a manual process in the sense that the presenter has ended the meeting and then manually kicked everybody out. Or it could be an automatic process where we have some heuristics that have kicked in, everybody's gone except for a couple of anonymous folks, 10 minutes have passed and boom, out we go, something to that effect. Manual deactivation specifically looks like the options that you see here, right? This is the most common aspect that I see, at least for meetings that I run. When I'm done with a meeting, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting, right? That has the effect of sending a delete conference to the focus so that we know that, boom, we're done. We're ready to get this thing out. This could also happen if you delete the calendar item inside of Outlook, right? Because if it's been established by the conferencing add-in in Outlook, deleting that particular item in the Outlook calendar is going to force us to go back to the Skype for Business server and remove reference to that meeting from the backend database. Now, manual deactivation could also happen if the organizer themselves gets disabled in Skype for Business, or they actually get deleted, right? If they get deleted, all of the meetings are gone. Not only deactivated, but boom, expired and gone. So you have to be very careful if you actually do end up and delete a user account in the environment, because this will happen to take effect immediately for users, even with active conferences, right? You're actively in a conference that's organized by a user and then you disable them, we'll deactivate their conference just like that, even while they're in it. And that could be entertaining. But that's just the way the system is built, right? If you've decided to disable the user, they don't get access to the system at all, including any active conferences. We'll just go ahead and deactivate them. From an automated standpoint, this kind of sums up the way the automation process works, right? We have these heuristic timers that kick in based on the amount of time an anonymous user might be stuck in a meeting. If there's nobody left in the meeting, right? Maybe everybody is out of the meeting per se, but they didn't cleanly close their client, right? I've seen this happen sometimes where people leave. You still see them in the roster, but their audio is not lit up. So maybe they're still there. Maybe they're still connected to IM, but they hung up their phone. Well, technically, they're still in the conference, even though they're not an active user. So if there are no active participants in the conference, we'll go ahead and boot that out with an automatic deactivation. We'll also do the 10-minute route. If we have an enterprise user that is gone from the conference, we'll go ahead and boot people out. And then, of course, if 20 hours go by without a brand new user joining the conference, then this heuristic will boot this conference out as well, just to make sure that we don't have any runaway conferences, right? Any conferences that just hang out and suck up resources for no apparent reason. And just in case you're curious of what the underlying messaging looks like, this slide will take you through some of the examples that you might see when we look at the deactivation call flow summary. So we kind of look at here some of these items that you'll see come back in the by a conference terminated. My enterprise user is absent. That's that 10-minute timer. Inactivity, that's the 24-hour timer, right? So these are great logs that you can catch and dig through, and you can actually go in and see exactly when a conference was deactivated, right? Once the conference is deactivated, all the MCUs get a delete conference request, so they start deallocating all of their resources. We're not going to attempt to retry this if it fails to get delivered or processed, but there are timers that are out there for their MCUs that'll make sure that they clean up any orphaned resources that may be there. At the end of the day, it's the MCU's job to tear down any dialogues or any media streams that he may have between himself and a client, between an endpoint. The focus is just going to tell him, hey, it's time to go away, and he has to clean up his own room, basically, and make sure that he's removing any of the MCU dialogues that he has with any of the other clients. Now, expiration is important because we want to make sure that we clean up the system with unwanted data, right? So once a meeting is done and it's deactivated and now it's past its expiration date, we want to make sure that we clean up all of the junk that might be lying around after the fact. And that's what part of the conference meeting expiration will do here. We can't store content indefinitely because we will take up disk space out on the file share. So as these meetings expire, we'll go through and delete out not only the meeting instance inside of the database, but the content that might be out on the file store as well. Right? This ensures that we're just basically doing the normal housekeeping that you might expect, and that we don't end up having a runaway amount of data that's stored out on our file store itself. Okay, so we get an understanding of how conferencing works. We know how to schedule them, we know how to join them, we know what their life cycle is. How do we expand this out in the HADR realm? Right? How do we make sure that this becomes highly available? Well, first thing that we need to look at is that quick definition of high availability and disaster recovery. Right? And we cover this in great detail in our HADR module, but a quick primer on it is basically high availability is providing automated availability within a single site, whereas disaster recovery is providing availability between sites. If you look at the slide that we have here, we're achieving high availability by having a pool of servers, 3 to 12 servers. They can all pick up the slack. They can all run any of the conferences that are assigned to that pool. That provides us high availability. In the event one of the front ends go down, one of the other front ends can pick up, and away we go. Backend database, where the conference information is stored, we have availability options there through mirroring, through always on, through clustering. Right? Our file stores themselves, they can be highly available with some, technologies like DFS and maintain replicas of the file store itself within that physical site. From a DR perspective, of course, we have pool pairing. So we have a pool defined in our main site, we have a pool defined in our backup site, and we go ahead and configure pool pairing. That will take care of replicating all the conference-related information over to the backup pool, including replicating content from the file store. Right? Sometimes a common misconception is I need to configure DFS and I need to replicate this content over here. You don't need to do that because the backup service is going to take care of replicating that content for you. You could certainly do it if you wanted to, but we're not actually going to use it. The backup service will take care of replicating the content as necessary. So let's take a moment and look at a chart, talk through a few scenarios of how HADR plays into the mix here when we look at conferencing. So first, take a look at the columns we have here, right? We're going to look at our different data types, right? Whether it's scheduling data, the dynamic data, the stuff that's in the file share, or stuff that's going on with an active conference. And then we're going to talk about how that applies to the HA pieces, right? Intra-pool failover, that's inside of a pool, versus inter-pool failover, that's the pool pairing, and then both in the planned and unplanned or disaster type scenario. So from a scheduling data perspective, right, the information is replicated via Windows Fabric, and there's a whole gory detail on that in HADR in that module if you need more of a refresher there. But we do prioritize information that's written to the backup database. That's called the synchronous write. So when I want to schedule a conference, not only do I write it to the front end and have it replicated to the 3 copies on the front end server itself, but I also synchronously write that to the back end database. In 2013, we had this concept of what was called a lazy write. We replaced that in Skype for Business with this synchronous write to make sure that we prioritize that write to the backend database and we don't run the risk of having, corrupt meetings. When we look at that same scheduling data, that stuff is prioritized in the replication via the backup service because that's critically important to us, right? We want to make sure that we have as consistent a view as possible of the conferencing data. So when the replication mechanism kicks in, we'll make sure that we prioritize the conference scheduling data itself. Now, dynamic conference data, that is replicated to 2 other front ends. That's the 3 copies that we look at from the Fabric perspective, but we don't bother to replicate any of that information to the DR site. And the main reason for that is, from a DR perspective, when we initially do the failover, conferencing doesn't come to life automatically. As an administrator, we have to invoke that failover to bring the conferencing workload back. There's going to be a delay from the time the conference drops to the time we invoke a failover. So that data is all going to be out of date anyway. So there's no reason to replicate the dynamic conference data. As mentioned, the content file share replicates via DFS inside of a single site, but we take care of replicating that via the pool pairing mechanism and the backup service when we're looking at intra-pool failover. Now, obviously, planned versus unplanned. Well, planned, ideally, we're shooting for no data loss because we actually know when the outage is going to occur. But if it's unplanned, you could have a loss of up to 15 minutes, right? That's the RPO, RTO target that we have in the HADR world. And then obviously from an active conference perspective, if I move from one server to the next because an individual server dies, I'll automatically rejoin the conference. Life is good, right? No need to worry about going manually in my client and saying, I've got to rejoin the link. The client will automatically take care of that. So it's automatic inside of the pool. Between pools, however, when I do the failover, there is no active conference failover at that point. And as mentioned before, it's because we have to declare a disaster. We have to make sure that we invoke failover. And then after that, the conference will be ready to go. But the users will have to go back to the meeting invite and click the join link so that they can rejoin that particular conference. Just a refresher to kind of highlight, from some of the data that was on the last slide, conference reliability is improved by having this synchronous write to the backend database for the conference data. It is critically important to understand that that's there, and we will prioritize the replication of this conference state via the backup service, right? All of this is to help us get better reliability for the conferencing services themselves, and additionally get a better end user experience, a better end user join experience. And just to scare you a little bit more, we put this nice little diagram that kind of shows all of the moving parts of what happens when we do the backup service and we do all the synchronization. This slide looks a little busy, but it's not really as bad as you might think. What we're really trying to showcase here is the fact that on the left-hand side, we have pool 1. On the right-hand side, we have pool 2. These pools are paired to each other, and it is the responsibility of the backup service to copy the data from pool 1 over to pool 2. And this includes data that would be found inside of these purple boxes here, RTC, XDS, and XDS, right? Being able to get the core information, including CMS, being able to get file share information, as you see on the right-hand side here, and also being able to extract the relevant RTC information from the front-end servers themselves. Get all that relevant information, package it up, send it on its merry way, and get it imported into the backup pool itself. Now, that handles the resiliency from the core conference itself, but remember, folks have to join the meeting using the simple URL. Well, we can't forget about that from an HADR perspective either. We need to make sure that we provide resiliency for the simple URLs, right? So in this case, we look at my meet URL. I hit DNS, I resolve the meet URL, and it says connect to pool 1. Well, if pool 1 goes away and I don't do anything about it, how do my users join meetings? I mean, even if I fail everything over and I bring all the services back up, If DNS is still pointing to pool 1 and pool 1's not there, this isn't going to work. That's why if you take a look here, this isn't just DNS. This is actually GeoDNS, right? So a way that we can provide resiliency for these simple URLs that state, oh, I want to resolve the meet.contoso.com URL. Fantastic. GeoDNS says, oh, we're going to talk to pool 1. Well, in the event that pool 1 goes down, now when we query DNS, it says, oh, I noticed that pool 1 is down. Go and talk to pool 2. I'm going to return the IP addresses for pool 2. And now my client will be directed over to pool 2, and he'll be able to actually connect to and join meetings now that I've got the environment brought back up from a failover standpoint. So simple URL disaster recovery provides that mechanism for us to ensure that if that first site were to go down, GeoDNS would allow us to get to the second location. Okay, take a little deviation from the core pieces of conferencing and talk a little bit about the web components that can support conferencing. More specifically, what we call UCWA, a Unified Communications Web Applications API, and the Skype web experience through the Link or Skype web app itself. Now, this is the technical definition of what UCWA, or the Unified Communications Web API, is. It has a lot of stuff on here, and you can certainly read this to your heart's content, but to just kind of sum up what UCWA is, this UCWA REST API is really what is powering the IM and presence capabilities, the mobile capabilities through the server infrastructure, right? It's giving us this capability of being able to connect via a web API for all of these services out there that need to consume our services, but don't have the heavy lifting that they can do with, say, a full-on SIP stack and talk into, an edge server or something of that nature. UCWeb provides us the ability to use these web APIs and use these web protocols, specifically HTTPS, to be able to gain access to the services that Skype provides via SIP, but have it be wrapped inside of this web API itself. Lots of fun that we can do with UCWA, and you'll see coming up in a little bit when we talk about mobility, we talk about call via work. A lot of these scenarios are built on top of this engine that we call UCWA. Now, in addition, we also have our Skype for Business web app. And the point of the Skype for Business web app is for us to allow a way for users to join our conferences in the event that they don't actually have a Skype for Business client. So they don't have a smartphone, they don't have a mobile device to gain access to our applications there. They don't have it installed on their desktop. How do I get into your meeting? Fantastic. You can utilize the Skype web app. Built into the browser. As of today, still requires a plugin for audio video, but we're working very diligently to be able to support technologies like ORTC, where we'll be able to build this functionality straight into a browser like Edge, for example, and not require you to have a plugin. But as it stands at this particular moment, we still need to have a plugin. That plugin is going to help us get the audio and video aspects, basically getting an ICE stack built in for us so that we have the capability of exchanging media and performing all those modalities that you would come to expect in a Skype for Business meeting, but through a web-based application. Now, you don't really have to do anything to deploy the Skype for Business web app. It is there automatically for you. But there is a neat little trick that we mentioned here, which is the ability to force the web app. Maybe you're doing some testing, or maybe you're just having some challenges with your client, right? I have the full client installed, but whatever reason, it just doesn't want to join, right? It connects, but then media drops or what have you. And maybe I just like to try the web app. Well, you can go into your browser, into the URL that you've put in there for the meeting join, and just add $SL equals 1 to the end of that URL. That forces the join launcher to launch the Reach client or the web app and basically skip all of its processing. It doesn't bother looking to see if you have the desktop client installed. It simply says, oh, I saw that you put $SL equals 1. Okay, I'll go ahead and launch the web app for you. It's a great way to do a little bit of test, a little bit of debug to see if you can get into the web application versus if you're having problems getting into your desktop or client application. Just in case you're interested, this is a little bit of what the architecture looks like for this web application. And I mean, the key points here are to understand the fact that, from Skype for Business's perspective, we're SIP. We are native SIP. That is what we do. But for a web-based application, well, that's not SIP. That's web, right? So we need to have a layer that will be able to take that information from the web and interface it into the SIP environment. And that's what this architecture, effectively looks like. On the left-hand side here, we have our base architecture for the rendering layer, which is all based HTML. We have a JavaScript component that we can use for the join launcher and so forth. All of that's the HTTP layer going through either UCWA or our data web relays, depending on what we're talking to, right? Whether it's the actual front-end server or whether we're going through a data web relay for the data MCU, the PSOM component, right? But you see this demarcation line right here. That's the SIP C3P, the CCCP, the C3P layer. So everything above this is HTTP, and then down here we're talking SIP. And these are the pieces or the glue that get these components to be able to talk seamlessly to one another. Now that's for the IM and signaling and all that aspects. Once they install the plugin, right, that's what gives us audio, video, and app share, which gives us these core components. It gives us our media stack here. It gives us the RDP stack if you want to participate in desktop sharing, right? And that's what allows us to interface back here with the application share MCU or with the audio, video MCU. And as I said, for now, this is where we sit, where we need this particular native plugin, but we're working very diligently to get us to the point where we can leverage something like ORTC and have this native functionality built into a browser such as Microsoft Edge. Looking at the architecture, we do have to keep in mind where we are, right? Are we on premises or are we in the cloud? Because the architecture might be a little bit different depending on where our focus is. So, for example, the websites themselves that we mentioned here, the internal website, the external website, right? You're going to see these on your front-end servers that you have in your on-premises environment. There's two different websites because we want to differentiate between the traffic that's coming in, right? Is this traffic destined and coming from the internal network, or is this traffic that's come in from the reverse proxy and is going to hit the external website? From an auth standpoint, right, that's going to depend on whether you're online or on-premises, right? Online, we have a multitude of options for authentication, including modern authentication, including the ability to do SAML and token-based and federated authentication using ADFS. You can get a lot more detail on that in the hybrid session that we talk about in this particular training. If you're in the on-premises world, we have the ability to do forms-based auth, integrated Windows auth, and even some options to do multi-factor auth using ADFS, but not nearly as streamlined as we'll get into when we talk about the modern authentication aspects coming up a little later. From a proxy standpoint, right, we do support proxying these connections, forward and reverse proxies, of course. And for the media traffic, though, we have to understand that proxies might cause a little bit of a hiccup when it comes to media. More specifically, we need to make sure that we're not passing through a proxy that's looking for traffic, say, on 443, and maybe performing some sort of basic auth in between. Our media flow isn't going to cooperate with that. So always be mindful of where the proxies sit when you're looking at joining meetings, especially with the Link web app architecture. It is based on all standard HTTP, HTTPS ports, right? 443 is the most common port that we're going to be using for this, but you can configure this as you see fit. And of course, we've got to take us through another ladder diagram just so that we get all the pieces of the puzzle together here for the Link web app join process. So here on my left, I have my join launcher connecting into Link web app. So at this point, I've either put in $SL equals 1, or it's determined that I don't actually have a Link client installed or a Skype client installed on my machine. I'm going to send a GET request over into UCWA, which is going to say, who are you? Right? And it's going to challenge me for some type of credentials or some type of ticket that I need to authenticate, right? Obviously, at this point, if I am an actual authenticated user, right, I need to go through my web ticket service, and I need to go through my gyrations of authenticating to the web ticket service. We cover this in great detail in the client and server module as part of the Partner Elite training. So you can check out that module to get more detailed information here. Once I get that web ticket, I can present the web ticket to UCWA, and that will now gain me access to the UCWA resources, which in turn will get me access to the focus, which is the conference itself, right? That'll then trickle back down to my client, and now I'll be able to join and get access to all of the good things that are happening inside of the conference itself. And lastly, we show you here a nice diagram that kind of shows all of the key players that are involved when we look at this collaboration architecture. So very quickly, we look at, we've got our MCUs here. These are my instant messaging, audio, video, app share, web conference data MCUs, right? The focus over here is the traffic cop that handles everything. All of his communication to these components is all done via C3P. More specifically, it's all done by a C3P over HTTP, if you want to get very technical about it. But all of this communication that's happening in red here, these are all C3P commands that are happening. My clients themselves, they don't actually use C3P, right? They take these C3P commands and they wrap them inside of SIP, and they send the commands up through the SIP channel itself. Now, if I'm a mobile client, like you see here, I'm going to wrap that inside of HTTP because I'm not a SIP endpoint, right? So my Link web client here, my mobile phone clients, right? They're all hitting HTTP. They're all hitting this UCWA component, which is then going to be the gatekeeper, if you will, to get me into all the respective modalities, whether it's RDP here to get the application sharing, or whether I'm actually using straight media to be able to talk to the individual AV MCUs themselves, for example, over here. Okay. So now we've gone through the core architecture. Great. How do I administer this thing? And what can I do from an administration standpoint? Pretty straightforward how we can get through administration. One of the first questions that we always get asked is, how many conferences are running right now? Well, you got some PowerShell commands that can very easily point this out to you, right? Here we show an example of using something as simple as get CS Windows Service to be able to see how many active conferences are running on this particular front-end server. And you can take this information, you can run it across multiple front ends, and you can even pull this information back into something like a SCOM dashboard, and you'd be able to see how many active conferences are happening across the front end pool at any given time. User configuration is done through conferencing policies, and this is where we can get into details of, controlling what the conference experience will look like. So, for example, I have conferencing policies here that say, I'm going to build a new conferencing policy, call it the large meeting, and I'm going to set the max meeting size to 150 participants, right? 250 is our max by default. Maybe you want to restrict it down for these folks only to 150. Great. We have other conferencing configuration items that we can set here, such as the content grace period. Maybe after 12 days, I want to delete content and not after 15 days by default, because I want to be able to maximize the storage space that I'm using. There's a ton of other conference settings that you can do. Just take a peek at the conferencing configuration policy and conference configuration settings that we have in our PowerShell commandlets out on TechNet. There's also a good set of synthetic transactions that you should be monitoring and looking into, right? If you're leveraging System Center Operations Manager or SCOM, you should be having SCOM run these synthetic transactions for you. This is a way for you to proactively test various components in the system and look for success or failure as to how your synthetic transactions are running. This way you can find some of the challenges or problems that might crop up before your end users actually do. And this table just shows us a quick reference to some of the conferencing policies that you can set, not an extensive list by any stretch of the imagination, just some of the more common things that you might see. As mentioned earlier, you can very easily pull up these conferencing policies out on TechNet and get a whole slew of information of what you can do and what you can configure and what you can tweak from an end user's perspective. Now, one of the last areas we want to talk about is our Skype for Business PSTN conferencing offering. In Office 365, we have the ability to host meetings and place our users into the cloud. Well, one of the common asks that we get is, I need my users to be able to dial into the meeting. Maybe we're not all using fancy smartphones. You need to be able to dial into a meeting. Well, easy enough to do on premises. What about when they're in the cloud? Well, in the cloud, we need to leverage what we call audio conferencing providers to do this, right? Audio conferencing providers will provide the ability to have PSTN dial in and dial out services. What we're talking about here is specifically a service offered by Microsoft. Microsoft can be your ACP in the cloud for your Skype for Business online users, such that when you now create meeting invites for users that are hosted in the cloud, we can provide dial-in conferencing numbers, as you see here on the left for these users, as well as the ability for users to dial out from the MCU to an external phone, a cell phone, or what have you. Now, we kind of lump this into two arenas if you think about it, right? When you are in the cloud, if you want to provide dial-in conferencing services, you need to have some sort of dial-in mechanism. Well, When you're doing it on premises, you can provide that with the Skype for Business server platform itself, right? All I need is some type of PSTN interconnect to an existing gateway or to an IPPBX, and boom, I can provide dial-in conferencing on premises, no problem. But once you move the user to the cloud, you have to leverage an audio conferencing provider that exists in the cloud. You can no longer leverage that on-premises environment for dial-in numbers to the folks that are actually serviced online. So that means we need to provide ACP or audio conferencing provider services out of the cloud. Well, we do that today in Skype for Business Online, and there's a number of audio conferencing providers you can select from, like Intercall and AT&T and PGI and so forth. We've just also added another name to that list, and that name is Microsoft. So the service we're talking about here is the PSTN dial-in, dial-out service provided by Microsoft as an audio conferencing provider. The goal here is to make this, again, a seamless conferencing experience for the user. Make it all first party, right? All coming from Microsoft. So no need to sign up with a third-party ACP or have a third-party contract. You could contract just with Microsoft and have us provide the dial-in conferencing numbers for you. This simplifies the experience, gives you the single bill aspect, and gives you this ability to interop between your cloud PSTN conferencing service that Microsoft provides and maybe an existing ACP that you might already have available. Now, why is this important? Well, because when you start looking at the service that's available, we don't have dial-in conferencing numbers everywhere all at once. So you might have a classification or a segment of the user population where it makes perfect sense to use the Skype for Business PSTN conferencing service by Microsoft. But you also might have a set of users that they're in an area that, or in a geography that we haven't expanded into just yet. Well, those users could still use the third-party ACP and provide dial-in conferencing services from those locations, while your other users transition their way over to the Microsoft-provided conferencing services. Visually, it looks like this, right? Effectively, you have this concept of an audio conferencing provider or an ACP. That could either be a third-party ACP, like we see here, or it could be Microsoft's ACP, as we see here. Both of them have interconnects into the public switch telephone network. So these are both going to provide numbers that a traditional phone user can dial to get into the meeting. From that aspect, we create what is called an audio bridge, or sometimes referred to as a barbell, between the AVMCUs that we use for our ACP or the AVMCUs that these third parties use and the actual AVMCU where the conference runs that's on the Skype for Business pool itself. So this means that you can have users dialing in from a third-party ACP or a Microsoft ACP, and either one of those will work against our Skype for Business online platform. So this is just a glance at some of the feature sets that we provide as of today. Now, keep in mind, this is a cloud service, so these offerings are continuing to evolve even as we speak. So obviously, we'll want to make sure that as you're reviewing this presentation, you always go out and check our online documentation at office.com and make sure that you're up to date on the latest and greatest features that we have available. Now, as of right now, this is what the conferencing service, PSTN conferencing service looks like, right? We're onboarded through Office 365 through a flat rate billing mechanism, right? As of around the April 1st timeframe, we're going to start rolling into a consumption-based billing model for PSTN conferencing. But as of right now, it's flat rate billing for the PSTN conferencing service. We make this as simple and streamlined as possible. So you can simply go into the admin tools, and you'll see some screenshots of it coming up here in a minute that shows you just how easy it is to assign a conference ID and a phone number to an individual user. This is all integrated with our solution, whether it's through Outlook or through OA or through the Meet Now interface or through a web scheduler. It's all there and works out of the box when you leverage our solution. We do get some usage reports that we can pull out of Office 365, and we do have some options to be able to configure and manage this through the tenant admin PowerShell commandlets that are available to us. Now, from an availability standpoint, the solution actually launched this past December 1st, and it launched in the countries that you see on the list here. Now, I want to make sure I clarify the difference between what we see as a sell to country versus what we see as a dial-in number availability, right? The sell to country section that you see here, if you have a billing address in one of these countries, that means that you can purchase PSTN conferencing from Microsoft. Once you have purchased PSTN conferencing from Microsoft in one of these sell to countries, you can then select a dial-in number from any of the countries that you see in this dial-in number availability list here on the right-hand side. So, for example, not to pick on my friends down under, but if I look at Australia, you'll see that they are in the dial-in number availability list. That means that if I have a billing address in the United States, I can buy PSTN conferencing and I can give my folks that are in Australia a dial-in number that's available to them locally. However, my company only has a billing address in Australia. I can't purchase the PSTN conferencing service as of yet because Australia is not yet on the sell to countries list. So you definitely want to be keeping track of our office sites to see as these lists are being updated. There is an update coming very soon around the 1st of March, if memory serves, where the sell to country list and the dial-in number country list will be expanding. So you definitely want to keep your eye on this, especially in the cloud space, to see as we expand our service out, if it comes into a particular country that you might be looking to expand into as well. Okay, let's take a quick tour around the Skype for Business Admin Center and take a look at just how straightforward and easy it is to configure dial-in conferencing. So here on my screen, I'm signed into my tenant and I've launched the Skype for Business Admin Center. And you can see on the left-hand side here, I have an option for dial-in conferencing. And when I click on this option, it's going to take me to a series of tabs that I can sift through and look at the specific configurations that I have in relation to the dial-in conferencing service. Now, in this particular instance, this tenant and the users that I have in this tenant are utilizing the Microsoft audio conferencing service. So as you can see here at the top, I show the Microsoft bridge, and you can see there's a lot of bridge numbers that are available for me here. Right? These are all of the dial-in access numbers that I have available to me inside of my tenant that I can assign as default numbers to my users, but that also any user could go and find and use to dial into any of the meetings that we have on Skype for Business. Now, if I switch over to the Microsoft Bridge Settings tab, you'll be able to see some of the options that we can configure here in relation to policies and join experiences. So, for example, do I want to have the meeting entry and exit notifications turned on? This allows us to announce when a particular user comes into the meeting or when a user leaves the meeting. In concert with that, right, do I want to ask the callers to actually record their name? So that way, when I do have the announcements turned on, I can hear that Brian has entered the meeting or Brian is exiting the meeting. I also have a chance to configure some of the security settings that we have here, more specifically, how long I want the PIN to be for their dial-in conferencing info. So, if I want the users to sign in and authenticate using a PIN to the dial-in conferencing settings, what's the minimum length that I want for that particular PIN? And in this case, it's set to 5 by default. We'll also automatically send out an email to users if we change any of their dial-in conferencing info, but you can choose to disable that here if you like. Now, that gives us a quick little tour of what the bridge settings themselves look like. Now, if I switch over to the dial-in users tab, you'll actually be able to see all of the users that are available inside of my tenant that are provisioned with this dial-in conferencing service. So they have the dial-in conferencing or the conferencing service license assigned to them, and they're basically ready to go and utilize the dial-in conferencing system. So if I take a look at my first user here of Alex, you can actually see he is using the Microsoft provider for dial-in conferencing, and I do have a default number assigned to him along with his assigned conference ID. Now, at any point, of course, I can click my little pencil icon here and I can go in and make some modifications to Alex's account. So from here, now I'm looking at Alex's specific account and looking at the properties of conferencing. You can see in the drop-down here, I have Microsoft selected. Now, if I decided to change the audio conferencing provider that was being utilized by this user, I could simply change the drop-down here, put in the relevant information based on the contracts that I've signed with that provider, and then Alex would be off and running and utilizing dial-in conferencing with that particular provider. In this case, I'm going to leave it with Microsoft and show you down here at the bottom. The next dialog shows me what his default number is going to be. And as you saw in the first tab that we looked at, this is the same drop-down you would expect to see. These are all of the dial-in conferencing numbers that I have available inside of my tenant. So I can pick any one of these numbers to be assigned as Alex's default number. But just remember, anybody can use any of these numbers to get into the meetings, right? This is just the default number that's going to show up for Alex when he goes to create a new meeting and send his meeting invite out. This is where you can also see the conference ID that's assigned to the user as well as the user's PIN. And also from an administrative standpoint, if you needed to, you could go ahead and reset either of those options. Now, of course, resetting the PIN is simply going to send out another email to the user to let them know their PIN has been reset. Resetting their conference ID is a little bit more of an intrusive effort because it's actually going to change the default conference ID, which means existing conferences that the user might have had aren't going to be valid anymore, which means you got to go back and find our friend, the meeting update tool, and make sure that things get run again for that user so all other meetings are back in sync. Lastly, for this user, we can see a meeting options setting down here to choose whether or not we want to allow unauthenticated callers to be the first person in the meeting. By default, as you can see here, because this is not checked, an unauthenticated user is going to land in the lobby. And we're going to wait for some type of authenticated user to come in before we actually allow that meeting to start. But if that's not your desired behavior, if you want to make it such that, even an unauthenticated caller can jump into the meeting right out of the gate, that's fine. You can simply come in here, tick the checkbox for this meeting options, and hit save. So that's a quick little tour around the dial-in conferencing inside of the Skype for Business admin tools. And that wraps up our conferencing session. So it gave us a chance to talk about everything from the client's perspective and how we schedule and how we work with the meetings themselves, through the server side of the house and how the infrastructure is built and how we go through the life cycle of the conference on the back end, all the way into the cloud aspects and understanding how we can transition our users into Office 365 and leverage a lot of the PSTN conferencing services that we're launching in the Skype for Business online platform. Thank you for your time today. I hope you enjoyed the session.